You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hello, I am Steven Willis, host of the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. He is Sam Hutchens, your friendly neighborhood Clarion Ledger Ole Miss beat writer. How you doing, Sam?
I'm good. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, it's always fun. I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a space while you got here in October and got acclimated and got good to go before I just started bothering you every week like I do cats.
Well, you can bother me more now. And yeah, I am acclimated. I've gotten my first snowstorm, and I know how to deal with roundabouts now. That wasn't an issue before. So yeah, I'm an Oxford native, I guess, now.
Well, you got here in October. Let's go ahead and start by talking about the football season. It was a weird football season. I honestly watched the national championship game and thought that Ole Miss might have had the second most talented roster in the entire nation, but they somehow went 9-3 and they somehow lost to Kentucky. And what was your impression of the football season? Talk about that team a little bit.
Yeah, I guess, and starting with the national championship, Steven, it did seem like there was this bizarre, maybe almost Ole Miss like weird flavor to it, where obviously Judkins kind of went off and there's that connection, but also you just, like you said, you talk about roster talent and you think about, man, who in college football could stack up to this Ole Miss or this Ohio State team that, you know, is the best team in the nation. And I think it does feel like at least there's an argument, there's a hypothetical far away from where football games are actually played where, yeah, Ole Miss could have the roster to compete. But yeah, that's the weird thing about breaking down this whole football season is at times Ole Miss looked like the best team in the SEC and a potential college football playoff champion contender. And then at times they're the team losing to Kentucky. So it's just such a bizarre mix of highs and lows. The most I've ever experienced in a team, the highest of highs and the lowest of lows.
Yeah. Do you know actually what I blame it on?
I'm curious.
I blame it on analytics, 100% analytics. Ole Miss played for the last 5 years like the plucky underdog, the go for it on fourth down, all of that stuff, doing all that stuff because they had to do it. Well, this year you had a defense that was giving up 12 points a game. You didn't have to score much. You could play field position. You could have played like Nick Saban in prime Alabama in 2013, 2014. If you played like that, Ole Miss goes 12-0. They don't lose to Kentucky, LSU, or Florida if they just do that. But Ole Miss can't get out of their own way from time to time about playing as the favorite. They're not used to doing that. And last season was really the first time that they were the favorite in all those games.
It makes you think like what Saban accomplished with McElroy and AJ McCarron, you know, quarterbacks that won't blow your socks off. Jackson Dart, what he did, it's like it felt like Ole Miss almost had every piece, kind of aside from the running backs. I guess Bama always had a running back, but that's interesting, Stephen, with the analytics and fourth downs this whole season. It felt like were just so important, and I know there are some fourth downs that are probably still keeping Lane Kiffin up at night. But when you tie it back offense and defense to LSU or Florida or those games. But yeah, it's fascinating how this season played out.
Yeah, I think every one of Ole Miss's losses this season, there was a 4th and 1 that was not picked up inside the red zone.
And then with the one possession games, it's like I hate to play the hypothetical ball because you know, like butterfly effect of what could change if you do trot Caden Davis out there one time against, you know, LSU or something. But yeah, it's man, what this team very easily could have been the second best team in college football this year, but certainly not one of the 12 most deserving teams to make the playoffs. So it's just such a weird mix.
Because you got beat by Kentucky. You know, I can excuse losing in the swamp. I can excuse the LSU game. The Kentucky game, as an Ole Miss fan, you probably don't know about this because you weren't around it. That Kentucky game is probably 15 times worse than 4th and 25 to an Ole Miss fan. just of what that meant. And the 4th and 25 prevented Ole Miss from going to an SEC championship game and potentially winning it. But that Kentucky game was just inexplicable.
And in hindsight, that was Kentucky's, we didn't know how bad that team was. At first you think, Mark Stoops has the guys running this year a little bit. And then for Kentucky to finish so poorly, I wonder what analytics would have to say. Maybe I'm assigning myself a story about most inexplicable losses of all time. Or I think I saw a national story, Steven, that said if Notre Dame would have won, the Northern Illinois loss from the Irish would have been the most inexplicable loss in college football history. So this wasn't to that level, but that home loss at Kentucky, it was haunting.
I remember Stanford beating USC back in the early 2000s as like a 39-point underdog. I do remember
the Bush Leinart era.
It was just after that, I do believe.
Okay.
But they were still rolling at that point.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's pretty good. Anyway, thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we will turn our attention over to basketball and talk about, speaking of inexplicable losses, we'll talk about the one that happened earlier this week, and we will talk about the Missouri game that is coming up. So stick around for that. Attending NFL playoff games is an experience unlike any other. The energy, the excitement, the camaraderie with all the fans are absolutely unmatched. I'll never forget the thrill of watching my favorite team clinch a playoff victory live. It's a moment I'll cherish forever. This year, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable memories with their new feature, Game Time Picks. It cuts through the clutter and shows you only the best deals for great seats, so you can focus on what really matters, actually being there. I used Game Time Picks to snag tickets for upcoming playoff games, and it was such a breeze. I found a super deal that was able to give me an amazing value for incredible seats. One of my favorite features, actually, was being able to preview the seat before buying. It's just so helpful. Plus, with their all-in pricing, I was not surprised with any fees at checkout. And Game Time's guarantee tells me that I can have peace of mind knowing that my tickets are going to be secure and delivered on time. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Locked On College. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Sam, let's turn our attention over to basketball real quick. And I sat there and I watched the game against Texas A&M, and Ole Miss controlled that game. Everything was going fine. It was just a typical rock fight Texas A&M Ole Miss game. It looked like one of those games. And then with 2 minutes to go in the game, Ole Miss was up by 8 points. And from that moment on, Buzz Williams put on a coaching clinic about how to do a comeback. And I don't think people realize how impressive what Buzz Williams and Texas A&M was able to do. They controlled the ability for Ole Miss to score. They made sure the right person, the person they wanted to get on the free throw line, got to the free throw line. They got their own shots in very good positions, including wide open. Over a 2-minute period, even having to give away fouls, it was a masterclass.
It truly felt like, just as there's a point in every basketball game where it changes from you're just playing basketball to you're looking at the clock, evaluating foul situation and, fouling and all that. And so I always liken it to like there's the 38-minute game where you're playing basketball, and then there's kind of like the 2-minute mini game at the end where everything changes. And Ole Miss was great for the first 38 minutes, but right when you start looking up at the clock and trying to do the math about possessions and, the worst case scenario is when things kind of went off the tracks for Ole Miss. And I got to tell you, Steven, like I was super surprised considering the veterans on that team and, the guy like Padula, not a guy you would think would throw away a pass late. Murray, not a guy, another senior guard you would think would throw away a pass late. So it was kind of a freak deal where, I mean, Steven, it was a great crowd at the pavilion, and there were a few people that got up to leave with 2 minutes to go when Ole Miss had an 8-point lead, and I think they got a surprise from David Kellum in their car, wondering what happened. So yeah, it was bizarre.
It was weird. It was like at the 2-minute mark, Ole Miss became the team that looked uncomfortable, not the team that was down by 8 points.
Yeah.
It was absolutely weird. Anyway, Ole Miss has to put that in the trash and get ready for the Missouri Tigers, and it should be an interesting game. I'm calling this a needs to win, not a must win game. It's a needs to win game with Texas and Auburn coming up next week. You really need to be 5-2 going into that stretch because that Texas game has all the potential in the world to be weird. It
Sure.
just does. And then Auburn is Auburn.
And here's, I got I haven't written my prediction story yet, but I think Ole Miss will win this game. And, the reason I say that is I try not to overreact generally to one possession or overtime games. And, sure, Ole Miss was beaten badly at Memphis, but in SEC play, they've had nice win after nice win. And Beard's only 2 losses have been in, a jungle of an atmosphere in Starkville, great crowd there in an overtime game. And then this game where you felt like you had it won. So for me, I think this Ole Miss team is still really good. A freak, I guess, defensive failure, a freak breakdown late, while a bit of a red flag, it doesn't change anything in my mind about the grand scheme of how good this Ole Miss team is. To me, what that loss illuminates as we start talking about Missouri is maybe the ceiling of this team. I think the floor of this team is, I think they'll get to the tournament. I think they're good enough to win a game. But does this team have the killer mentality, the closer, the one player, whatever you want to call it, late, where if you're in another one of these 3-point game or overtime game in the round of 32, can you win the tight games that every single NCAA tournament team that goes on a run has to? And that's the only thing I haven't seen from this Ole Miss team yet. I've seen them beat a top 5 team at Alabama and beat them soundly and dominate defensively. But I just haven't quite yet seen that Mamba mentality, if you will, in the last 90 seconds when it needs to happen.
And when Ole Miss has been good this year, Malik Dia has been the alpha on the court. He's been the man on the court. When he has been taken away, it feels like there's a little bit of confusion of who needs to step up. Sometimes it's Jamin Brakefield. Sometimes it's Sean Padula. Juju Murray is there as well. Matthew Morrell, he's still coming back from an injury. I think the main problem that Ole Miss has, and they need to figure this out by the end of the year if they want to make a tournament run, is they need to figure out who is going to be the alpha. They need a hierarchy a little bit. When Malik Dia is not quite there, they need to know this person is going to step up and he's going to be the guy now.
Yeah, I'm with you. And what's interesting about Dia is he was great against Alabama these first SEC games, but he's played in the SEC before, but I almost liken it to he put 3 great games on tape, and then maybe these last 2 games he started to get planned for a little more. He has more traffic around him. Mississippi State was great about surrounding Dia, and to me, it's almost like the rookie comes out making his major league debut, and he has a great first 2 weeks, but then they find out, hey, maybe this one quadrant, if you put your slider here, like here, and that's all you see is back foot sliders or whatever until you can hit it. So I'm waiting. Dia came out hot. The SEC seems to have kind of adjusted. Now can Dia adjust back? Can Chris Beard do something schematically to get Dia what he was doing against Alabama and LSU in those teams?
Yeah, and Ole Miss fans are going to be like, they're going to be a little bit apprehensive about what I'm going to say, but there are some moments in that Texas A&M game where that Dia from the Alabama game showed up. It just wasn't consistent. And if he gets back and figures out that formula, they're going to be fine. And Missouri, they have a lot of transfer. Dennis Gates does a great job with their team. They're 15-4. I think they went winless in the SEC a year ago or something like that. And now they're 15-4. They're ranked in the top 25 because everybody in the freaking SEC is ranked in the top 25 right now. It's a big game because there's a huge, monumental difference in the league this year between being 5-2 after the Missouri game and being 4-3.
Remarkable turnaround for the Tigers. And yet, now I will say the Tigers, their wins have been against, I got it right here. They've beaten Arkansas, Vanderbilt, and LSU. So they're still looking.
They beat Florida.
Oh, did they beat? Okay. So I was going to say, they beat Florida by 1 here. So they've got their one huge win. Ole Miss has their one huge win. These are two similar teams in terms of, like, I think, Steven, we know who the 3 elite teams in the SEC are, or 4, that top bunch, but which of these Ole Misses or Missouris or Mississippi States is kind of going to be establish that next top tier in the SEC? That's what I'm wondering.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Sam Hutchens from the Clarion Ledger. Sam, what do you got going on at the Clarion Ledger this week, bud?
Yeah, a lot of basketball, still monitoring the last of the football, players trickling in. And then we got Diamond Sports starting up soon. So Diamond Sports minus Austin Simmons will be the play starting up shortly.
All right, Sam. Thank you very much for joining us, and I'll talk to you later, bud.
Appreciate it.